Shrink Wrap Radio number 312, Behaviorism and Spirituality with Dr. William Baum.
It's Shrink Wrap Radio. All the psychology you need to know and just enough to make it dangerous. It's all in your head. And now here's your host, Dr. Dave.
My guest today is behavioral psychologist Dr. William M. Baum, and we'll be discussing his views on behaviorism and spirituality. William M. Baum received his A.B. in psychology from Harvard College in 1961. Originally a biology major, he switched into psychology after taking courses from B.F. Skinner and R.J. Herrnstein in his freshman and sophomore years. He returned to Harvard University for graduate study in 1962, where he was supervised by Herrnstein and received his Ph.D. in 1966. He spent the year 1965 to 66 at Cambridge University, studying ethology at the Sub-Department of Animal Behavior. From 1966 to 1975, he had appointments as a postdoctoral fellow, research associate, and assistant professor at Harvard University. He spent 2 years at the NIH Laboratory for Brain Evolution and Behavior, and then accepted an appointment in psychology at the University of New Hampshire in 1977. He retired from there in 1999. He currently has an appointment as associate researcher at the University of California, Davis, and lives in San Francisco. His research concerns choice, molar behavior/environment relations, foraging, and behaviorism. He's the author of a book, Understanding Behaviorism, Behavior, Culture, and Evolution. Now, here's the interview. Dr. Billy Baum, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you, David. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, it's good to have you on the show. It's been about 35 years ago since we met while I was a visiting professor in the psychology department at the University of New Hampshire, where you were on the faculty. And I recall that you and your wife extended a warm welcome and had my wife and me over for dinner. I'm not sure I've had a chance to thank you for that lately, but it's one of my lasting memories of that time.
Well, I remember well the conversations that we had back then. It was very pleasant for me and instructive as well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because my memory is fairly shot at this point, and unfortunately, we didn't have a whole lot of contact beyond that dinner for the 2 years that I was at UNH. But you were very much in the hard science aspect of our discipline, where I was, with my clinical training and background, was on the softer, more experiential side of things. Also, it's been my experience of university life in general, not just at UNH, but also at Sonoma State University, where I taught most of my career, is that in general, we professors tend to get so busy in our little silos that there's not a lot of contact with one's peers. Have you found that to be true?
That's an unfortunate thing, but I was always trying to reach out to my colleagues and give them some more understanding of what it was that I was trying to do. You're right, of course, that I was thinking of studying behavior as a natural science. And that was not generally accepted in my department. In fact, most people really had no idea what that would mean, and of course the university thought of psychology as social science. But you're right. There's that end of the study of behavior, which can be a natural science, and which I think of as allied with biology.
Right, right. And you're certainly not alone there, even if you were at the University of New Hampshire. I see from your biography that you were at Harvard as an undergraduate, and as a result of some classes with B.F. Skinner, you were drawn at that time to behaviorism. What was Skinner like? Do you have any good stories about him or anything?
Well, sure. Let's see. It happened. I started out as a biology major at Harvard, and it happened that because I was interested in animal behavior, I was sort of leafing through the catalog, and in the spring of my freshman year, I saw this course. It was by Skinner. Of course, I had never heard of him. And it was a course about human behavior. So I went to the first lecture, and it seemed interesting, so I took that course. That was the famous Nat Sci 114. And notice it was a natural sciences course. It was
I am noticing that.
Satisfy a natural science requirement in the general education system. And Skinner taught, a very decent course there. It wasn't exciting, certainly wasn't boring either. And actually, it was the following year I took a course from Richard Herrnstein, and that was what turned me to psychology. And ultimately to, the psychology department at Harvard consisted of what you would call the hard science end of psychology. There was a separate department, the Department of Social Relations, that had all the social science components in it.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Well. So actually, Herrnstein convinced me to switch from biology to psychology.
And what was it about the Skinnerian approach that spoke to you? I mean, did what they were doing speak to some deep place in you?
Yes, I would say that's true. Because coming at it as I did with this. What should I say? This tendency to try to see behavior in a natural science framework. Why, that was exactly what Herrnstein and Skinner were doing there. So it was perfectly natural for me. In fact, I really didn't have to go through some kind of conversion process or anything like that.
Okay. Now, I have the impression, and I don't know if I'm right or not, that behaviorism maybe has evolved over the past 40 years. Would I be right about that?
Yes, you would be right about that.
Okay, well, what are the changes that you've seen over that time? How would you characterize the evolution?
Well, first off, you have to I would want to make a distinction between behaviorism, which is really philosophy of science applied to behavior, and the science itself, which nowadays is called behavior analysis.
Okay.
And so I would distinguish between behaviorism and behavior analysis. Now, behavior analysis, of course, has grown tremendously. I mean, there's been a steady progression, lots of research and accumulating knowledge as should be in a science, and that's all very good. The philosophy part, the behaviorism, also has evolved too. Skinner, of course, was the founder of what he called radical behaviorism, and I would say that Herrnstein and his students, like me and Howard Racklin and some others, have carried that further. Now, what's involved there is looking at behavior from a scientific point of view. And the question is, well, exactly what is behavior and what does it mean to say scientific point of view?
Yeah, and we'll probably get off into a more metaphysical direction in a bit, but at the whole question of defining behavior or defining a stimulus, I know that at least in the early years, and maybe it's still the case, that was not as clear as it might have initially seemed, that,
Right.
Yes, everybody can agree what's a stimulus and what's a behavior. Maybe not quite so readily.
Right, right. And one of the great insights that Skinner had was that you cannot separate behavior from its context and its consequences. So he proposed this idea of a three-term contingency, he called it. Now, that was stimulus and response and reinforcer for in his terms. Mm-hmm. But see, now I would be more inclined to say something like context and activity, and the consequences are, you can think of them as reinforcers, but the reinforcers actually can be tied to our evolutionary history.
Okay. Now, what about your own evolution as a psychologist and as a person over the past 40 years? And maybe you can give us a quick overview of your own research career.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I was an undergraduate at Harvard, as I told you, and I became a student of Richard Herrnstein's. And when I graduated from college, I took a year off. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and actually I was considering becoming an artist. So I went to art school, and I was painting and sculpting and so on. And then my father, who was an artist, discouraged me, and finally his I guess you could say his wisdom prevailed, and I went back to graduate school. So I entered graduate school in 1962, and Herrnstein was my mentor. And I then, I got my doctoral degree in, I finished it up in 1965 and went to England, where I spent a year at the Subdepartment of Animal Behavior. I was working under Robert Hind there. He was a fairly well-known ethologist at the time, and then I went back to Harvard. I was a postdoc there for a while, and then a research associate, and then I was an assistant professor. So I spent a lot of years there at Harvard. And when my time was up there, I took a position at a federal research lab in Maryland, the Laboratory of Brain Evolution and Behavior, which was in Poolesville, Maryland. I stayed there for 2 years, and then I got the position at the University of New Hampshire, and I was there for 22 years before I took retirement and moved to San Francisco.
Well, in those 22 years, what was the focus of your research? I'm trying to remember if you had an animal colony of some sort there. I almost seem to remember
well,
that.
You may remember that I was studying rats in sort of semi-naturalistic environments. I had a room set up that came to be called among the people there the Rat City. And so the rats were, they had a colony of free-ranging rats in a fairly large room. And they were earning all their food and water by pressing levers. That that was, I was thinking in terms of bridging the gap between studying behavior in the laboratory and behavior as it occurs in the natural world.
Sure.
And so and that was actually in those years when I was first at UNH. The field of behavioral ecology grew in biology, and it was the natural corresponding field in biology. So there was a fair amount of cross-fertilization back and forth. So I was studying foraging and thinking of foraging as operant behavior, and it was a very interesting time. Then I began to develop a different. Well, I had been developing for quite some time, but a different view of behavior, getting away from the constraining assumptions that Skinner had been working with, the discrete responses and discrete stimuli, and the contiguity between the response and the reinforcer. All of that seemed to me to be much too limiting. And I started thinking about behavior as being extended in time, and that seemed much more natural to me, and it made it easy to talk about behavior in the everyday world as well as in the laboratory. So now I think of behavior as composed not of momentary responses, but of activities that extend in time and take up time. The things that we do in the course of a day. You get up and you do your morning activities, you eat breakfast, all of these things take time and they're extended. And then you maybe go to work and do various things at work. And that actually turns out to be quite a good approach, I think.
Well, it seems to me, based on a slide presentation that you sent me from a fairly recent presentation that you did, that your ideas extended out of the sort of continuity have extended way out, maybe as a result of both quantum physics and Eastern spirituality, leading you to argue for a non-dualist understanding of the universe. Now, that seems like way out for a behaviorist.
Well, okay. So you're asking me, what conceivable connection? Well, it's actually I think you're right in putting your finger on the non-dualistic framework, and what it is this, that science, natural science, cannot assume dualism. You cannot have two kinds of stuff, like, for example, the mental and the material, because you never can figure out, it's forever a mystery, in fact, how the one could affect the other. So when people talk about the mind-body problem, they say, well, how can the mind affect the body? And the answer is it can't, because it's a different kind of stuff. So no science can assume a dualism. To understand your subject matter, whether you're a chemist or a physicist or a biologist, it doesn't really matter. You must assume that there's only one kind of stuff, and that means monism. But now, if you think about, I don't know how much you know about Eastern philosophy, but if you've come into contact with it at all, you recognize right away, oh yes, that's anti-dualist also.
Yes.
Dualism is really ignorance, because reality is not based on a multiplicity of things. Reality is one, infinite, indivisible, eternal, and you know the basic central statement in Hinduism is thou art that, which is to say, not that you will be or something like that, but you are that. You are that infinite one, indivisible, eternal self. Self with a capital S, not with a little s, you know?
Yeah. I'm also very enamored of Carl Jung's work, and I don't know how familiar you are with that, but he was very influenced both by the unfolding developments in physics and Eastern spirituality, and he has a convention in his writing of distinguishing between self when it's spelled with a little s and self spelled with a capital S, and it's very congruent with what you're saying. So what we've learned from Eastern spirituality and more from quantum physics is the interconnectedness of everything.
That's correct. And an interesting side to that, when you start thinking about behavior, is when you try to understand the causes of behavior, and you realize that behavior of a person or a rat, it doesn't really matter what, these events that we think of as behavior are part of a great nexus. So they occur, you could say, in a context, but there's the before and after, and the whole. It's artificial, really, to try to separate out some bit of behavior. So you can very naturally think about behavior as occurring in this very, very wide, if you like, possibly infinite context. And you know what? Alan Watts wrote an article about Skinner, in which he argued that Skinner actually was a mystic, that his writings were mystical for this very reason.
Interesting. I never encountered that. Do you know how Skinner reacted to that charge?
I think Fred Skinner would, of course, vigorously deny it. But I think that what Watts had to say made a lot of sense. Yeah, because he pointed out that Skinner thought of behavior as occurring in this extended nexus that might have no end and no beginning.
Now, I mentioned that you sent me this group of slides, I guess, that you presented at a behavioral conference. I couldn't tell exactly where you presented it, but it looked like it was a behavioral conference. Would that be an unusual topic for a bunch of behaviorists to be talking about quantum physics and Eastern spirituality?
Yes. I knew what I was doing when I created this symposium. I organized the symposium about reality, and there were two other people who spoke besides me, and I brought in the Eastern view, and I just was arguing that if you thought the real world is something separate from yourself, if you take the sort of folk psychology view, the common sense view, that what happens is you look out at the real world and you get information about it, and and then if you're a scientist, you come to understand that real world better, but it's always out there. That leads immediately to dualism, subject-object dualism in that case. So you as the subject are somewhere inside and the real world is outside. And so that makes a science of behavior impossible. So that view cannot be correct. And then I brought in the Eastern mysticism to show that reality is one and infinite and indivisible, and that the perception of the limited self as separate is an illusion. And so then I was explaining further that within the illusion, among the activities that one might pursue, one might be a scientist. Okay, so within the illusion, you can be a scientist and be studying and researching the natural world, but it's all within the illusion.
So we are sort of forced to behave as if there's subject and object in order to get on in this world.
That. I would say that's exactly what we need to get away from.
Okay, well, say a little bit more about that, because if you're how does one, if you understand that you're in an illusion, that it's an illusion, but somehow we live within this illusion, and so I think we kind of act as if it's not an illusion.
Well, people often do. You're right about that. I mean, as an observation, people often do act as if this illusion were real, but I think even just a little reflection can lead you to the conclusion that it couldn't possibly be real, for the sorts of reasons that I was just giving. It leads to kind of a view. You know the philosopher Gilbert Ryle. He had a very nice summary. He called it the ghost in the machine.
Yes.
The idea that that your body is a machine and it's sort of animated by some inner self. Well, where is that inner self? What could it possibly be made of? When when a surgeon opens up your body, even your brain, whatever, he never finds self inside there. So what is that? It's just an imaginary thing. And so the another way of thinking about the illusion is that it is our ignorance of reality. This turns it around, so in a way. So our ignorance of reality means our ignorance of the one that is the truth, that indivisible, infinite one, and so in our ignorance, we think of ourselves as limited, as, you're, David, and, you tend to identify with your body maybe, and whatever probably your own behavior and habits and so on. And I have a tendency to do that too. So that's our ignorance. That's what we need to transcend.
Well, when and how did you get drawn to Eastern spirituality?
Oh, yeah. This ties back, actually, to what you were first asking me about Fred Skinner. Funnily enough, he actually was an instrument in my coming to follow Meher Baba.
That's a rather surprising statement. How did that come about?
Yeah. Well, here's how it happened. I was from high school days. I was fascinated by Eastern mysticism. I first came into contact with Hinduism when I was 16, and And I studied the Bhagavad Gita, read it over and over again, and branched out, of course, to other things like Zen and Buddhism and Theosophy even. So I was very interested in what I would call spiritual life, although back then I might not have called it that. And I was with my wife one day eating in a little restaurant and in Cambridge, and the waiter was wearing a pendant with a picture on it, and I asked him, who's that in the picture, and he told me that's Meher Baba, and proceeded to talk for quite a while about it, and so I heard that name then, and it was some months after that. Fred Skinner had the habit of cleaning out his office of everything he wanted to get rid of about twice a year. And he would put this stuff out on the seminar room table, and anybody who was interested could take whatever they wanted. And so one day I was walking through the seminar room, and there was a set of Meher Baba's discourses. And I noticed it, and then I thought, oh, Meher Baba, that's the guy that the waiter told me about. So, being curious, I picked them up, and I put them in my office on a shelf, and then sometime after that, I started reading the discourses, and I was very, very drawn, and that's actually how I came to be a follower, or what we say, a lover of Meher Baba. Well, I asked Fred some time later, well, how did you find those discourses, Well, I discovered that some follower of Meher Baba who lived in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where there's a spiritual center, had taken it into his head somehow to send Skinner a set of the discourses. And Skinner told me, I got them, and I looked at them. I opened them up and looked at them, and then I decided, well, this is not for me. And so that's how they wound up on the seminar room table. And I said, well, Fred, no, you're right. They were not for you. They were for me.
Good one.
So that's how, in a nutshell, he and I had a bit of a laugh over it, and he was the instrument.
Amazing.
In my coming to Meher Baba.
Yeah, and I seem to recall Meher Baba as being widely quoted for saying, "Smile, be happy." In fact, I think for years I had a little card on my mirror with his smiling face and that quotation, "Smile, be happy."
Well, it was "Don't worry, be happy."
Oh, you're right.
It was the song that song quotes Meher Baba. Don't worry, be happy. But it wasn't really just a light-hearted saying. He was very serious when he said that. Don't worry, be happy. That was really serious advice.
Yeah,
and he said, don't worry, be happy. I'll take care of you. Sort of leave everything to me.
Because it seems to me now that his exhortation, "Don't worry, be happy," in fact anticipates something that cognitive behavioral psychology and the positive psychology movement have only recently begun to appreciate, which is that to a great extent we have an opportunity from moment to moment to choose happiness. Would you agree?
I would agree 100%. I don't know a lot about this positive psychology, but I've heard a bit about it, and I think it's right on in that particular way. Worry is only just a waste, and it leads nowhere but to misery. And you do have the option to be happy. Just forget about it.
Right.
What will happen will happen. See, a large part of the problem is that people dread certain things happening, bad things, we say. But, what will happen will happen. And if you see the world through this particular lens of spirituality, then you realize that not only is the limited self an illusion, but all this business of controlling what happens, I am the captain of my destiny and all that sort of stuff, that's illusion too. That's ignorance also. Mm-hmm. And if we can open up to the experiences that are sent our way, then and recognize that they come from love. See, that's the thing we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about the centrality of love in the universe. And Meher Baba emphasized that tremendously, that everything that comes our way, whether we like it or not, is sent to us for our own good, from the one who loves us more than we can ever love ourselves.
Now, when you talk about the one who loves us more than we can love ourselves, that begins to suggest to me some kind of a dualism there, that there is some entity out there, whether we call him God or whatever, separate from us, that's sending us love.
Oh, yeah. Well, as soon as you use the word God, it conjures up a lot of ideas that are, just terribly distracting and off-putting. So I haven't been using that word, and the thing to realize
where does this love
that
come
in
from?
our ignorance, mm-hmm. these things take on, the matters of our lives take on an importance that they do not really have. What's happening is a process that is God coming to know himself consciously. Okay, that is to say, the one is waking up through all of us, through the whole creation, as if it were a dream. So dreaming up this creation then allows there to be consciousness, and then for that consciousness to be redirected away from all this multiplicity, and eventually, mind you, every drop soul is destined for this, eventually to merge into the one, that is to realize what you really are.
What about the issue of the philosophical issue of solipsism? And people, tend to raise that sort of an objection. How do you deal with that in terms of non-dualism?
Well, solipsism says, something like, well, I know I exist. I don't know about the rest of you.
Yeah.
But actually, in mysticism, in Meher Baba's view of the universe, it's actually fairer to say, I don't exist. None of us exist in reality. So it's not that I exist and I don't know about the rest of you. It's that I don't exist. None of us do. And ultimately, we're all destined to find that out.
Okay.
That is to say, we're all destined eventually to go from ignorance to understanding, to truth, to realization of reality.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any personal experiences that stand out to you as particularly spiritual in nature that you could share with us?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by spiritual in nature. If you're talking about things like visions or such, no, I don't think I've ever had an experience that would qualify as a vision. Although, of course, I know plenty of people who have, but that kind of stuff doesn't seem to happen to me. But what does happen is or what has happened to me is, as the years have gone by, I feel less and less like a separate self and more at one with this reality. It's a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight.
That's interesting. You know, some people report that they have had an experience of oneness and with nature or as a result of some trigger, we don't know what, but some people report that they've been able to experience a kind of blissful awareness of the oneness of everything. But you're describing it as a more gradual process and a maturational process in your own life.
Well, and the experience that you're talking about happens, and then it may fade, and then it happens again, and then it may fade. Well, I'll tell you how my first wife, you never met her. She is the mother of my older 3 children, but she died. She was very skeptical when I would come home and tell her, you know, back when I was reading Meher Baba's discourses, and I would tell her the things that I was reading and how it drew me and how I was drawn to Meher Baba. That, by the way, is the one remarkable experience that I have had, is that in reading the discourses, I started to fall in love with Meher Baba. That had never happened to me before. But she was very skeptical of all the stuff I was telling her, and she was worried that I was going to run off to India and abandon her and the children. And so when I proposed to take a trip down to South Carolina to the Meher Spiritual Center, she insisted that she was going to come along and keep an eye on me. And so she did, and we were there, and it's such a beautiful and peaceful place. And we were enjoying it very much, and there's a large stretch of beach, because it's right on the ocean. So we were down on the beach, and I was sitting and trying to meditate, and she was sitting some distance away from me, and mind you, she was very down-to-earth, you understand, very down-to-earth kind of person. She came over to me, and she was laughing, and she said, "Well, you'll never guess what just happened to me." And I said, "Well, what? What was that?" And she said, "Well, I was sitting there on the beach, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something white, and I turned, and Meher Baba was sitting next to me on the beach."
Oh, my goodness.
And I was very impressed, of course, and I said, well, what did he say, you know? Well, you know, of course, Baba was silent. But she said, well, he didn't say anything, but I felt this tremendous wave of love coming to me from him. And so we went back to our cabin, and the next morning, when we got up, she said to me, Meher Baba is exactly who he says he is. And mind you, Meher Baba said he is the avatar of the age. So that's how my wife came to Meher Baba.
Wow, that's quite a story. That's quite a story. And and so did that kind of put the two of you on the same page then?
But that's, in a way, they're a distraction, because the real spiritual path is our everyday life, and not these extraordinary happenings. It's bringing spirituality into our everyday activities. When you brush your teeth, or when you are preparing to go to work, or whatever it is, you can bring to it this perspective, this understanding that nothing happens except in this infinite context, and always with one purpose, that we should realize who we really are.
Well, I totally agree with you, and about the importance of how we conduct our daily lives, and trying to remember love and the illusion that you've been speaking about. And I think of the 2 years that I spent in New Hampshire, and so much that I've forgotten, that memory of just your warmth and inviting us over to dinner, it stands out. And I think it was a manifestation of living the kind of life that you're talking about.
Well, and I would say that going back to the point that it's a gradual development, following the spiritual path doesn't go by leaps and bounds. It's generally gradual, and so you would probably find me quite changed from the way I was back then. Mm-hmm. It was quite a long time ago. Right.
Well, as we wind down, I wonder if there are any final points that you'd like to make.
I want to say something about behaviorism, because I think that many people misunderstand what behaviorism is, and there are a lot of people who have criticized Skinner, but they've never actually read his works. I wrote a book about behaviorism in order to try to rectify some of that, and I think that it's important for people to understand that it's not some kind of a system that would enslave people or something like that. Although a scientific approach to behavior does exclude concepts like free will, for instance, or agency, because it takes the perspective that behavioral events are natural events, so they happen in the same way that other natural events happen, like thunderstorms and earthquakes and so on. But it's not evil, and I think that if people understood a little better, they might not like it, but they would at least be willing to see that there's something worthwhile there. I also you'll notice that in our conversation here, I also see behaviorism as completely compatible with spirituality. It's completely compatible with the life of the spirit. And that's the way I live my life. In my professional life, I am a behaviorist, and I see that as the work that I've been given to do in this lifetime. I'm not just a philosopher, that I do research on behavior. So I would like people to know that behaviorism is not a wicked idea, and that it is compatible with spirituality, and hope that they would have a better view of it.
Yeah, and that's one reason why I'm really glad to have you on espousing this view, because I don't think many people, myself included, think of behaviorism or behavior analysis in the same breath as spirituality. But of course, there's no a priori reason why they shouldn't be.
Right. Well, that's what I'd like people to realize is that there is no incompatibility there.
Okay. Well, Dr. Billy Baum, it's great to talk to you again after all these years, and I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Well, thank you for having me, David. It was fun talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Billy Baum. I wonder if you were as surprised as I was by his juxtaposition of behaviorism with non-duality and spirituality. I understand the case that he's making, but it's certainly not one I've run across before. But then I've not spent a lot of time in behavior circles either. I believe this interview is the result of an email from a listener who perhaps noticed my 2-year tenure at the University of New Hampshire in my bio and wrote to ask if I knew Billy Baum from that period and informed me that he now lives in San Francisco and is involved with the work of Mayor Baba. This sounded intriguing to me, and it was good to touch base with Billy again. I want to thank that listener, whoever you are. I tried to find you in my back emails, but failed to do so. I loved Billy's story about B.F. Skinner inadvertently putting him on the path of Mayor Baba. Talk about reality stranger than fiction. According to Wikipedia, Mayor Baba lived from 1994 through 1969. Around age 31, he took a vow of silence, which he maintained for the next 44 years until his death. He used an alphabet board and hand gestures to communicate. In 1954, he announced that he was the avatar of the age, meaning an incarnation of God. The discourses that Billy Baum referred to were dictated via the alphabet board during 1938 to 1943. These discourses, transcribed or worked on by close disciples from points given by Baba, address many aspects of the spiritual life and provide practical and simple direction for the spiritual aspirant, according to Wikipedia. During those years, at least one discourse appeared each month in a journal that was being published. I was a little thrown off at the end of our interview by Billy's assertion that there is no free will. What does that do for the choice to be happy, which we discussed earlier, or the choice to be a loving person? I guess he would say that they are all part of the grand illusion. It sounded like he's opting for a completely deterministic universe, which to me conjures up an older mechanical model of physics. So I'm wondering where complexity theory, indeterminacy, and randomness fit into his model. But there wasn't time to pursue this thread. Finally, I have to say I loved Billy's account of his skeptical first wife being transformed by her unsought vision of Mayor Baba. For most of us, as for Billy, our spiritual growth is a gradual process. Don't touch that radio dial, as they used to say. This is the part of the show where I'm usually asking you for your support, but today I'm going to turn the tables around with a free offer. There's a new app for the iPhone and iPad called iMood Journal. They sent me a free copy, and it's pretty cool. It allows you to quickly and easily characterize your mood one or more times a day by clicking on a color scale. There are colors for moods ranging all the way from depressed to ecstatic. You can also track medications and the number of hours you've slept. Interestingly, today's interview was with a behaviorist, and behaviorists say you have to track it to change it. The very act of tracking your mood may in fact change it toward the positive. I can see how this might be a good tool for positive psychology intervention on yourself, and also it might even be a useful tool for monitoring the results of counseling or therapy. I've placed a link to their product site in the right-hand sidebar, and they've generously given me 10 free promo codes, which can be used in the iTunes store to get the app for free. So, the first 10 people who send me an email requesting a promo code will get a response from me with their code. Clearly, only people with an Apple iOS device should apply, and the codes expire in a month, so you should write to me right away if you want one. Hey, I've got more continuing education units for all those of you who need CEs for your various licenses. I've just put up a 5 CE unit course on the pros and cons of positive psychology. This is in addition to the 6-unit positive psychology course that was already available on our site. We now have something like 41 units that you can earn simply by listening to selected Shrink Rap Radio episodes and answering some easy true-false questions after each. All courses are offered through the prestigious Zur Institute. Just go to the Store tab on our site at shrinkrapradio.com for the link. I really want you to follow Shrink Rap Radio on Google+, especially if you have a webcam. You'll be able to join us in a Google+ video hangout. And I'm planning to offer an online dream group very soon using that feature. Listener and volunteer Brandon Dennis has generously created an easy-to-follow set of instructions on how to follow us on Google Plus and how to join a video hangout. And you'll find the instructions under the Contact Us tab at shrinkrapradio.com. So go there and download them, please. Speaking of dreams, I'm going to be doing a day-and-a-half workshop in Stockholm, Sweden, on September 7 and 8. The 7th is a Friday evening. We'll start in the evening, and then we'll go all day Saturday with appropriate breaks. You can find full details on the site. Just click on the Swedish flag icon in the right-hand sidebar on our site, and that will give you all the information you need to sign up. And hey, I'd love to see you in Stockholm, Sweden. That's not too far away from a lot of places in Europe, so I'm hoping some of you might be motivated to do a little travel, combine it with a vacation. That's what I hope to do. We have a new transcript on the site, and it is number 305 on the dangers of diagnosing children as bipolar with Stuart Kaplan, MD. And speaking of transcripts, here's one on my wish list if anyone is up for it. It's number 97, The Freud-Jung Letters with Doug Davis. Please let me know if you'd be willing to take this one on. Now, I have to tell you, Doug's a fast talker, so let me know if you're man or woman enough to take him on. We've got a couple of short video teasers on YouTube. I decided that watching a whole hour-long interview on YouTube is not something many would want to do. Instead, thanks again to Brandon Dennis, we've got several 4-minute teasers there, probably with more to come. One features a brief segment from my interview on psychotherapy and meditation with Dr. Mark Epstein, and another is on projective group dream work with Jeremy Taylor, and a third one that I just put up is on synchronicity with Dr. Joseph Cambray. So Check them out on YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/efocus groups. And I hope you'll help drive traffic there using Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and any other such social networking tools that you may have access to, because the point of those short videos is really to help people discover the audio version of the show. So I'm hoping people discover us on YouTube and then migrate in our direction. And speaking of Facebook, we now have 95 likes on our new Facebook Shrink Rap Radio Biz page. Thanks to all of you who have liked us there, and to those of you who will do so now or soon.
Are you ready to all gather together, all your heart, all your soul, all your anger, all your hate, and shout with me in group therapy, my brothers and sisters, my blood? Show me.
Here's a late-breaking announcement, hot off the press. We have yet another transcript on the site, thanks to listener Jeremy Devens. It's number 308, My Long Run of Synchronicities, with me, David Van Nuys. Thanks for doing that one, Jeremy. My kids will each receive a copy as part of my legacy. In fact, our first email from our listener community is from Jeremy, and it's in reference to the transcript he had just completed. He writes, Hi, Dave. Wow, this was a great interview. I had no idea about your background, and I'm wondering if it wasn't part of my draw to your podcast back in 2008. I'm 26 years old, and I too have never met my father at this point either. It's a question I don't think of much, but hearing your story has got me thinking. I've been paying more attention to the synchronicities in my life this week, and it's been fascinating. It seems the more I follow and allow the synchronicities to guide me, the more I happen to feel like I'm on the right path, in the right place, at the right time. At a workshop I attended last night, a woman mentioned the importance of, quotes, living with a question, and how when you do, answers appear everywhere. That seems to be a key component in synchronicity, and it's especially profound if that question is drawn from your dreams. Would you agree? I'm curious to hear about your dream journaling process and any advice you might offer in that realm. Thanks, Jeremy. Well, Jeremy, thanks for your diligent transcription work, and I'm glad you were touched by all the synchronicities around my father quest. Perhaps my story will inspire your own father quest, and if it does, I hope it will be as meaningful for you as mine was. I do agree with the idea of, quotes, living with a question, though I've never thought of it in those terms, but I do know that when one is writing a book or on a quest, helpers seem to magically appear. It also puts me in mind of going to bed with a question to be addressed in a dream, what's known as the practice of dream incubation. You asked about my dream journal. I've been keeping a dream journal off and on for over 40 years. I write the dream in the first person present tense to help revivify it. Then I give it a title, which ends up being the first level of dream interpretation. Then I write out any day residue from the previous day that seems like it might have bearing on the dream, along with any associations that come to mind. My dreams almost always make sense to me in terms of what's going on in my life. Sharing in a dream group helps to bring insights from angles other than those that I come up with on my own. Well, I hope this inspires you to take up the practice yourself. Next, we hear from Yolanda, who writes, Dear Dr. Dave, I can't thank you enough for all of the knowledge and hard work you have invested in your podcasts. I was diagnosed with MS in 2008, and finding your podcast 1 year later gave me the clues about some of the emotional issues underlying MS. I'm doing very well because of the inner work your podcast motivated in me. Thank you. Best regards from Mexico City, Yolanda. Well, Yolanda, thank you for your thanks and letting me know that these podcasts have been useful to you in dealing with the challenges posed by MS. While I appreciate your praise, I think you are the one to be honored for your courage and your brilliant ability to apply what you're hearing here to your own situation and to your inner life. You know, that makes me so pleased that you're able to use it in that way. And I'll do my best to keep the information flow coming your way. Finally, here's one more, this one from Chris, who writes, "Hello, Dr. Dave. Thank you for alerting me to the latest podcast on synchronicity with Dr. Cambray. I found it interesting and ordered the book, and will look forward to the, quotes, mother load that I had referred to on the topic, as you put it. I did sense, however, that he may not have experience or may not have considered researching this topic using altered states of consciousness or modes or other modes of knowing and inquiry. But it did sound like the state-of-the-art analysis and synthesis based on the latest convergences of science, philosophy, and Jungian psychology. That's a good characterization, I think. He goes on to say, I have been feeling a bit homesick since last week, and for the first time in about 25 years decided to find and watch the Andy Griffith Show and the show My Three Sons. It felt so nice that there was such a time, and part of me wished to vacation there for a while. I was saddened days later by the passing of Andy Griffith, and so grateful for what he left behind. Ciao for now, Chris." And Chris, I guess the association with Andy Griffith there was a bit of a synchronicity for you as well, and that's probably why you mentioned it in that context. Chris, thanks for being a listener and taking time to write. I don't know if Dr. Cambray has explored synchronicity from other states of consciousness. However, we do know he started out as a chemist, so he may have whipped up his own batch of LSD, but somehow I doubt that.